The DIESOL podcast.
Digital integration in English as a second or other language.
Episode 27, How to Use Breakout Rooms with Savyonne Steindler.
Hello and welcome to DIESOL. This is episode 27. We are your hosts. I am Brent Warner.
And I'm Michelle Reyes. Oh my goodness, episode 27 already.
Can you believe it? we've made it the magic number 27, whatever. It's a prime number, right? No? I'm not a math teacher.
Can we continue?
Sure.
Skip this question.
You don't want to talk about that? You don't want to talk about prime numbers on this, Michelle? That's not your
Stop derailing our topic.
All right. Okay. So how are you doing?
I'm pretty good. I was mentioning in the pre-show that I'm a little sad because I just left California. And so the shock of being back.
You can move back at any old time. Maybe.
I was spoiled for 2 weeks. No, it was great. I'll be back soon.
Okay. So today we have Savyonne Steindler. Savy, how are you?
Yeah, doing well. Happy to be here.
Good. Thank you for coming on the show. So Savy, we brought you on because we wanted to talk specifically. We've been looking out there, seeing what different teachers are talking about and what people really need help with. And a lot of teachers are still struggling or figuring out or trying to integrate breakout rooms, especially in Zoom. I think that's pretty, people are really starting to recognize how important that is. And I think that's growing more and more. And some teachers, maybe people who listen to us are like, I've been doing breakout rooms since the first day, but a lot of people haven't, right? And so they're just kind of doing the lecture thing and whatever. But I know that you've been putting a lot of work into it. So we want to talk.
A proper introduction.
Oh yeah, no, I got my introduction coming. I'm just saying, like, Savy, we want to talk to you about this, okay? So Savy, let me give you the proper introduction, and you tell me if anything's wrong here. But Savyonne Steindler, you earned your BA in Cultural Anthropology and Jewish Studies from University of California, Santa Cruz, and an MS in Tesol at Cal State University, Fullerton. And then Savy volunteered teaching EFL and health education, spending a bunch of time in Gondar, Ethiopia. So that's, geez, you've been all over the place. You got so many different experiences. So Savy currently teaches non-credit ESL at Irvine Valley College together with me, which is awesome. And then also at Orange Coast College. And along with, and you tell me if I'm saying this right, Marilee, is that right? Marilee Cervantes. Savy is the co-author of ESL for Parents of Elementary School Children, English Skills to Advocate for Your Child's Success, which is due to be published by Kendall Hunt in spring 2021. That's going to be a good topic too.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very exciting.
Yeah, we don't get a lot of elementary talk. We don't get enough elementary talk. I feel like, there's like a whole different part of the ESL world that's like elementary, and so maybe we'll have to talk about that again in the future too. But so here we are. Today we're focusing in on breakout rooms, and so Savy, can you just share? Why? Tell me a little bit about your experience with breakout rooms and using them.
Sure. Well, I tend to be a very, student-focused teacher. Mm-hmm. I like to spend most of my classes in class, in in-person classes, in groups, and I'm not a big fan of lecturing. So, as soon as we went to Zoom, I was focused on how can I make, the activities that I love work on Zoom. So I try to spend most of my classes in breakout rooms doing different activities, switching them up, every 10 to 15 minutes. I don't know if I'm really an expert, but I've tried to think of a lot of different activities to engage my students, and also activities that work with a number of different topics, because I'm teaching all sorts of subjects, idioms, grammar, workplace English, English for parents. So I like to think of activities that work, in many different settings with many topics. That makes our lives easier and also easier for our students.
Yeah. And so I think that's an important thing to think about too, is like the different settings for your teaching, right? Because I feel like sometimes teachers are like, oh, well, I'm teaching this, and so yeah, of course we're using breakout rooms, but I'm teaching that, and so I don't really have a reason to use breakout rooms, or maybe like limited thinking or limited practice in doing those types of things. So you said you're teaching idioms, grammar, workplace English, pretty much the whole. I mean,
even right? Parenting, English for parents. I think you said, or parent. Mm-hmm.
So a pretty big variety there, right? And so there's a place for using breakout rooms pretty much wherever you are in the ELL world, right?
Yeah, I agree. And over the summer, I was teaching an IEP class that was a reading, writing, grammar class, and even with reading and writing, I think there's a big place for breakout rooms. And that's one way to make, learning about writing and reading more enjoyable for students and less bland, I think. So I think every topic, it can work well.
That's a really good point, because sometimes teachers get stuck on, well, we can only do listening and speaking activities. Mm-hmm. And that's just, initially that's the first thing that should come up when you're thinking about it, but you've got to be able to do beyond that, because when we do group discussions or small group discussions or pairs in face-to-face teaching, we don't just do listening and speaking, right? Mm-hmm. So I like that you're bringing that point up.
So let's jump into the thick of it. We've kind of introed here, so let's jump over and actually start talking about how you do all of this, Savvy.
So, as we said just now, breakout rooms serve as a great place to have paired or small group discussions, but there's a lot to consider when we use them, so as to not limit ourselves and not place limits on our students, and also to break up the challenge that is teaching online. We want to talk a little bit about how we should set up rooms, because we should be thinking about that just like we do in the classroom. What activities work best for breakout rooms, right? Some activities may work better in small groups or pairs. And then what do we do while the students are in the rooms? Is that just do teachers go in and out? I know I've seen a lot of teachers ask Zoom for the ability to monitor all rooms at once. Mm-hmm. Or is there a time when the teacher needs to step back and not monitor? When is the right place to go in? And then what do we do after a breakout activity? You just get zoomed back to the main room and then it's over, and now what? So we want to talk to you a little bit about what you're doing in the classroom and how you approach those ideas.
Great. So I'll get started with before. I think before is really critical because, as many people have mentioned, once you go into the rooms, it's hard to monitor. Just like Ixchell said, you can't monitor them all at once. So you need to really make sure that students are prepared for whatever task, and they know what to expect once they get to the room. So for me, I always like to give students something to look at while they're in breakout rooms. And depending on the task, that might just be questions in the chat box. That might be a Google Doc link to some kind of worksheet or activity. It might be just having them take a picture of the screen. And I like to give students many options. So I'll usually give them a link and I'll say, also you can take a picture. Sometimes I give QR codes because I teach non-credit and a lot of our students struggle with technology. So first, I try to give them something to look at, and then many ways to access that once they're in the breakout room, in case they don't know how to use one way.
So let's talk about that for a second, Savvy, because this is actually quite an issue with Zoom and like the chat links, because when students join in late, they don't see the links, or as soon as they go out, you can do the broadcast. I don't think the broadcast lets you do links though, right? Like you have to go and go into the chat and leave a link if you haven't prepared them ahead of time, right? So
exactly.
This is kind of technical, but I think it's valuable for people to hear, like what are the things that you actually need to pay attention to doing actually in Zoom or whichever one, right? To make sure that they get all of those. So, hey, you tell them actively, like take the picture or click the link before we go, or I don't know, like what is your process for all this?
Yeah. So first I explain the activity and I model it. Then I will usually put the link or the questions into the chat. I will say I don't like file sharing on Zoom because it takes me a long time, at least, like to find the file. And then students on iPads, I don't know if it's still true with the latest update, but students on iPads don't get the files.
No, it's a mess. It's a total mess.
I just hate file sharing.
Devices.
Yeah.
So I usually do a Google Doc link unless it's something really simple like conversation questions. And then I tell students open the link before you go to breakout rooms, because again, I don't know if this is still true, but it was the case that on phones and iPads, students couldn't see the chat from the main room once they went to the breakout room. So I tell everyone open it before you go to the breakout room, or take a picture before you go. Whichever they prefer. And then I also, usually I put screenshots of how to share your screen. I only do it like once per class. And when I was teaching IEP, I didn't do this, but with non-credit, it's really important, I think, for them to like see how to share screens. Cause often they just don't even try because they think they can't do it. And then if someone comes in late, most groups will be sharing their screens. So, I don't even have to give them the file or the link. They can just go right in and see what their classmates are doing on the screen.
And then just real quickly, because you're saying, hey, it's okay to take a picture of this too. So that means that whatever you're sharing, you're trying to get all of the directions onto one screen, like one slide of whatever you're sharing with them. Is that right? Or so it wouldn't be multi-part, I guess is what I'm saying for that. Or would it be?
It depends. So sometimes I have multi-part things. In that case, then I wouldn't advise them to take a picture.
Okay.
I would just rely on them having the link. But if it's something that fits all on one screen anyways, so I throw that in, feel free to take a picture.
Right.
But usually, like now we're in what week are we? Like, I think OCC is week 7 and IVC week 8, right? We're going into?
Sure. Something like that.
Hopefully I'm right.
At this point, who knows?
We threw
by
math
now they know the drill. Yeah.
Okay, so then, so you get them into their rooms, right? So you're prepping up that way. Oh, and then by the way, let's also talk briefly about actually moving them into the rooms, because I know that a lot of teachers have problems with like, how do I get them into the rooms? Is it always like the easiest one to do is just the random breakout rooms, right? Like just clicking the button and say, hey, randomly, I want 6 rooms and I want 5 people in each room or whatever it is. But that's problematic too, right? Like, because you don't always, language balance doesn't work that way, right? Or maybe you have a specific set of group of students that you want to go together, and then teachers are like, well, okay, it's going to take me 10 minutes to go click and make sure that I've got all the right names with everything. So how do you process that?
Yeah. So for me, I know that you could pre-assign the groups before, your meeting starts. But for me, I teach non-credit and I never really know who's going to show up on a single day. So I don't bother to make the groups in advance. Also, at IVC, we have, I can't remember the word. They can come anytime during the semester, right?
Oh, the rolling enrollment.
Yes, exactly. So, even some student I never met before might show up. So what I do is I randomly assign, and I think carefully about how big the group will be, especially in the beginning of the semester. If I want them to share their screens or use annotation, I will make sure I have bigger groups because there's a higher chance that someone in that group will know how to do those things.
Oh, okay. Smart.
Yes. If it's something like that's lower, has like a lower tech requirement, then I can, maybe choose smaller groups, whichever group size is ideal for the activity. And then I randomly assign groups and I take a quick look, and usually I know which students are more tech savvy. So especially in my OCC classes right now, I have maybe class sizes of about 20 students. So I can take a quick look and make sure there's someone relatively tech savvy in each group. IVC, my idioms class had 38 people the other day, so I can't necessarily do that. But at the point we are at now, anyways, we're pretty tech savvy. So that's what I think about with grouping. I randomly assign, and then I just make some quick changes. So I might move 1 or 2 students, so it doesn't take very long.
Okay, cool. I'm going to throw out one more hint that I learned somewhat recently that's been really helpful for me, which is teaching students to rename themselves with their group number. So as soon as they, I tell them to put, so if I want to repeat a group, and sometimes I do because I'm like, hey, today you're doing part 1, tomorrow you're doing part 2, or whatever it is. And so a great tool inside is on the screen. There are the 3 dots. So when you move your mouse over a picture, there are the 3 dots. You click on that and you have the option for rename. And so when you teach your students to rename, then you would say, hey, okay, if you're in group 1, then put yourself as 1. So it would be 1 Brent Warner, or, 2 Ishel Reyes, or whatever it is, right? And so then very quickly on my breakout room screen, I get everybody's names rearranged by number. And then and then it's very quick to say, hey, I want them number 1s to go into group 1, number 2s to go into group 2, number 3s to go into group 3, and I can just click it, and I get it done in about 15 or 20 seconds, as compared to the 4 or 5, 6 minutes that I was like, okay, wait a second, Xiaowei Lu and Xiaowei Liu, Liu versus Lu, and which one, and like getting all confused in my head trying to read the different names and all those things. So if you're repeating, a lot of people didn't know about that, I guess, and I've heard, I was on Twitter the other day and someone's like showing it, and I was like, oh yeah, that's really valuable. That is a trick that will save you a lot of time if you're repeating groups over and over again. Okay.
That's a great idea. And I saw that you can also have students now with one of the more recent updates assign themselves. So that might also help you.
Yeah, I haven't tried it yet, but the only problem is that all the students need to be updated on the newest version of Zoom themselves. And so they will get there, probably by the time this episode comes out. I've been telling my students, download it. But Zoom doesn't push updates on people as much as other programs do. Like, hey, you've got to download version 1.1.1.1.3. Like, it's like, no, Zoom does not force that upon you nearly as much. And so a lot of my students haven't caught up with that quite yet. But okay, so now let's move into the room. What are we doing in the rooms?
Sure. Well, I have a lot of go-to activities that I like to use, and a lot of them are just adapted activities from my in-person classroom. Do you want me to explain some activities?
Yeah, sure. Let's see what you got going on.
Okay. So, well, first I just would say that, I don't spend all my class doing these activities. Of course, we use the book. We use, the activities that are in the book along with the class. And I have students share screens if we have an ebook for that, or, we do those normal kinds of activities too. But also, when we're trying to review certain points, I try to bring in, more CLT kind of activities. Okay. One is Jigsaw. I really love jigsaws. I'm known as the Jigsaw Queen at OCC. A lot of my classes have textbooks that are really text heavy. So it can get really boring, and, you're trying to think, how can I, make it different this unit? I don't want to just have my students read, every time in the same way. So we do jigsaws, and I'm always afraid it's not going to work on Zoom. I always think it's going to be terrible. Like, how is this going to all work perfectly in a breakout room? But it works better than in the in-person classroom every time I try.
Okay. So let's talk about that for a second. So one, can you quickly, for anyone who's listening that might not be familiar with jigsawing, which at this point, it's fairly common practice, but not necessarily everywhere. So can you clarify, like, what is a jigsaw, and then how do you set it up for the breakout rooms?
Yeah. So basically a jigsaw is a type of information gap where students have different pieces of the information and they're trying to put it together. So first you break up a text, or you can do it with a listening. I haven't tried it with a listening, but that might work well actually on Zoom. So you break up a text or listening into pieces, and then each group gets one piece, and they read it together or listen together. And you can give them instructions. Like, I tell them, like, take notes of the main points and discuss anything that's not clear to you in their groups. Then you jigsaw. So you take one representative from each of the original groups and you form new groups. And each person has to share what they read about or listened to in their first group. So they each become an expert and can share their new expertise with a new group.
Yeah. Okay. So then, So that's the kind of standard setup for Jigsaw, right? And then how do we do this though? Because I think a lot of teachers are like, yeah, I did this in the classroom where they would sit at a table together and then they would all run around and go to different places. But how do you set this up digitally, right? Because it's going to be a different. I mean, the idea is still the same.
I think it's scary for some teachers to try it out because you're not seeing them physically, right? You're not seeing them. So that becomes like, well, I'm afraid that it's like you said, it's going to fail or something. So sorry, Brent, didn't mean to cut you.
No, you're right. I mean, I think there's a lot of like theoretical, there's a lot of breaking points in there, right? The link didn't work or I didn't get in or I couldn't find like I couldn't access the Google Doc or whatever it is, right? So I think people would be interested in like the technical setup here. Like how do you make sure that it's going to work for your students?
Yes. Well, first, whenever I try something new, I try to tell students like, oh, we're going to try this out today. And I've heard other teachers say they do this and I took it from them. Like, we're going to try, experiment today. We're going to try something new, see if it works. And if it doesn't work, then we'll know. And that way I think you can, have a little less stress for yourself in doing it. But I will say every time I've done it on Zoom, it works perfectly. So
wait, you're here like several years later saying, I've been doing this for years, but this is the first time I've ever tried. Just in case it doesn't go well, right? You have a safety there.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I agree. I do the same thing with my classes all the time. It's always like, hey, everything's an experiment. Everything, we don't know what's going to happen, right? Especially online. I mean, I got kicked out of class 3 times the other day, and I'm like,
worse.
Sorry, guys. Okay.
Yes. So I think setting them up, and I don't do that now when I do jigsaws, but if you're nervous, so that's one way to kind of lower the expectations and lower the stress. Then I make sure everyone knows their group, and I make sure everyone knows what they are in charge of reading. So I use PowerPoint for my Zoom classes. So I will list group A is reading this, whether it's a page number or a link. If I'm using links, then I just copy and paste all the groups with the links and put it in the chat. And I tell everyone, open your link before you go to your group. And I read out everyone's names, or in a bigger class, I would type out in advance everyone's names in the group so they know which group they're in. In the in-person class, I always had people like confused, don't know which group they're in. But now I've never had that problem, actually, surprisingly, in Zoom class.
Oh, that's interesting. Because it's a lot, because there's like multiple modalities of ways that they can see what's going on, is what you're saying, right? So maybe fewer problems, or they can kind of catch it themselves, where they might not hear you in a regular class if you're just saying, hey, just go over there, right? So,
yeah, maybe.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah. And then let's see. So I make sure everyone has their different parts. And then I make the groups in advance, like maybe when they're in a previous breakout room, because like I said, I never know who's going to come to class. So I write down or the first time I guess is random. Sorry, I'm getting confused. The first time I do it randomly. And depending how many students I have.
Right.
And then I assign them to the groups. And they go and they report, and I tell them to share their screens in advance. So if one person loses a link or is confused, then they can get, with it right away. Maybe that's why it's easier on Zoom, because they're just kind of like put into their groups. They don't have to find their groups. Mm-hmm. And then I give them time and I pop through the groups. Then I bring them back. And the really important thing for me, while I'm in the groups, I'm making their new groups. So I look at the list of names on Zoom and I see who's the first person listed under each group, and I write those people together. Who's the second person listed? I write those people together. Third. So I'm making their new groups as they're talking in breakout rooms. Okay. And then they come back and I assign them. And this takes time. And I heard Brent had a good idea of having them like rename themselves with their new group number. I don't do that right now just because I'm not sure all my students know how to do it because I'm in the non-credit class. But what I do is I put the instructions on the screen. So while I'm making the new groups, they have something they're reading and looking at so they know what to do for the next task.
Okay,
yeah.
So that's smart. So you're putting something up. Sorry, this is the moment you've brought everybody back between group one, right? The expert group. So they do the expert group work, then they come back, then you have something some activity for them to do for like a minute or two while you are preparing while you're basically reorganizing the new groups. Is that what's going on there?
Yeah, I just have the instructions for what to do next.
Okay.
So like you're going to get with your new group. Each person will have read something different. You'll take turns reporting to your group what you read, what were the main ideas, the most interesting things. So, that can take them, a minute or two to read as you are manually making the groups.
That's smart. So you're doubling up on purpose, because I would sit there and just be like, okay, I'm going to explain this all to you guys and you're going to listen. And then I would obviously not be able to click through at the same time. So you're just saying, hey, just read it because I need to get this set up. So they know what you're doing, but that's a lot better use of your time.
I wanted to mention, I was just speaking to another colleague just today. We were talking about how using breakout rooms or for speaking activities, sometimes it becomes a burden when students automatically think, wait, how am I supposed to respond to this while they're still taking in information? And so I like that you're putting something up for them to now sort of have like a little bit of quiet head time to read it and comprehend it, and then be ready to respond, and not just like, okay, go to the next room. And now you're like, wait, I was just over there, but there was no transitioning. And so it can create a burden on our emergent speakers, since they're constantly expected to respond and they're so worried about how to respond. So I really like that sort of brings them back and gets them ready to continue to the next activity.
Yeah, and I haven't really thought of it before, but especially if it's your first time and you think it may take, a couple minutes for you to remake those groups, you can tell students, okay, take this time to take notes. What were the main points that you covered in your conversation? Because not everyone takes notes while they're talking. So you can give them more of that reflection time for that purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
That's a great idea.
Okay, so then now you've taken the time, you're ready to put them into their new groups, right? And you send them back out, and they've got group section B or whatever it is, right? They're in part 2 of this, right? So what are they doing here? So
yeah, they each take turns in the reporting, and I think this is the part they like the best, because they get to hear from the other groups. They take turns. This part takes a bigger chunk of time, I find. And I just pop in, and I always give them about a minute or two before I pop in, because I realize it takes some time to get settled, and I don't want them to right away rely on the teacher to help them get started. So I give them a minute or two, and then I pop through and make sure everyone knows what they're doing. And most of the time, when I pop in, they're already doing their jigsaw and they're reporting back to their group.
Yeah, this is a very satisfying feeling when you go into a room and students are working and talking to each other. Like sometimes you go in and there's dead silence, right? And it's like, come on, you guys, talking. But when you go in and they're like, yeah, this is what I was, and it's like, oh, okay, this really worked, and that is, as a teacher, it's very fulfilling, I guess.
And I also have a confession. Okay. So recently, as a teacher, when I participated in some webinars, and the culminating activity is always, we're going to breakout rooms to discuss, and it's like, man, yeah. Oh, so if that's just a directive, and people, sometimes it's nice for people to pop in and ask, but I feel that what you said is giving students something to look at or notes to take. And then, that sort of gives them a little push, especially I'm shy. I don't like to talk. And that might surprise people, but I prefer to listen and maybe later talk. But again, what if you're that new student? That's a scary thing.
Yeah. Totally agree.
But, giving them that time to settle and get started, because eventually someone's going to say something and it may not be related to the topic, but they're going to break the ice and then focus, or the teacher might come in and refocus them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, it might be partly because I teach non-credit and my students are incredibly motivated and they want to learn and they want to be there. So they're going to, even if they're shy, they're on task and they're focused. But I think also, also my IEP students over the summer, they had great breakout room conversations. So it's good to give them a little autonomy. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that those experiences for us as teachers, when we end up in those breakout rooms, they're good learning opportunities for us to go, wait a second, this person did not set us up very well. Or, like whatever they did was awesome because I'm totally digging this and I'm ready to have it, and so paying attention as teachers to how other teachers are presenting that information to us is taking
the
that mental
art form.
level. Yeah.
The art form of breakout rooms.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So then Savvy, for this case, we're still talking about breakouts in general, but like, then you come back out of the breakout room, back to the main, everybody back together. And so how are you keeping them together and engaged at that point? Is it just a review, or is it like, what do you got going on when you're back with 30 or 40 people or whatever it is, or 20?
Yeah. So I like to always give them some kind of post task. So it might be that I tell them, choose one person from your group, to report back something interesting that you discussed. I might broadcast that message halfway through. I don't tell them at the beginning because I feel like they have a lot of instructions already. Or towards the end, I might pop into the groups depending how many groups there are. I might do a Zoom poll. Lately, I'm getting really into Zoom polls as a way of just formative assessment.
A next episode.
Yeah. So you can, have some comprehension questions. For example, one Jigsaw I did was 5 interview tips for my workplace class. So I might have some comprehension questions about the different tips. And we can do that poll and see, okay, how much did we actually get from each other? If it's a reading Jigsaw, I try to also encourage them. I only had you read one part in class, but now that we've created this hunger to know more, these are the pages, you can read the other sections yourself. In a credit class, I might assign it. In a credit class, I might make it optional, and a lot of students will choose to do that. So those are some.
Yeah, I really like the idea of the polls coming in because you've already set it up. Here's all the information that they should be knowing by the end, right? So did they do everything well? And that's a really good way for you to guide and to know where to follow up and to check for comprehension, of course, and do those formative assessments and see where you need to spend more time talking to them or doing more activities after the fact too, right? So, okay, awesome. So that's a pretty good rundown. I think that could be generalized for everything, but I know, Savvy, you said you also do not just jigsaws, but you have all sorts of different activities that you're doing. So let's just let's just grab a few of the things that you might recommend in different settings. What other things are you trying to get students to do when they're going into breakout rooms, and how are you using it for them to better engage? Yeah.
So right now I'm teaching idioms and grammar of two of my classes. So a lot of that is, controlled, guided, communicative practice. So I need to think of different kinds of activities that work on Zoom for those stages. So one thing we do is Taboo. And I had to think, how can we adapt? A lot of us are familiar with Taboo. How can we adapt that to Zoom?
Okay.
And if you don't know Taboo, you get a word and it's a secret word and you have to describe it. And your group needs to guess which word you're thinking of. So what I do for Zoom is if I'm doing vocabulary, I will take the words and I just make a grid of the words in a Word document.
Okay.
Or if I have a Quizlet set, I go to print and I make it double-sided. So then it puts automatically all of my words on one page and I just screenshot that. Okay. Then I can easily get without having to type them. So then I share that document with students and we model first together. On Zoom, I do a lot of modeling because it takes a while for me to get to every group. So I will choose a word and describe it and have my students guess. And then I show them screenshots. How can you share your screen? I put them in groups and then they will play together, choosing one of the words that they see and describing it. And then their team members or their group members can guess the words and take turns.
Okay. So this is, I've thought about this activity a few times, but I haven't processed quite yet. So, and maybe I missed you saying this or maybe we haven't talked about it yet, but how do you make sure that the other students don't see the words that you're giving, right? Because when you share, it's like you share with everybody, right? Or you share with one student. But how do you get it out so it's like that little, each individual one student per group is the one that gets the access to that? How do you make that work?
So that's my workaround. I don't do that.
Oh,
I make a grid with like 30 words.
Uh-huh.
So they're choosing one out of the 30. Everyone sees the 30 words, but they don't know which one you're choosing.
Okay. I see. So they know that, hey, this word is going to be on this page somewhere, but I'm going to have to guess based on the clues, and then I can choose one of the 30 based on those different clues in there.
Exactly. And I think it's actually a little easier for students that way. So they're not just like pulling out of their mind. They have like something they can look at. And I've adapted this for adjective clauses, and it was really fun. So I would have like different objects or people, and they play this game, but instead of just giving random clues, they say it's someone who, or it's something that, to give their clues. And then they're practicing adjective clauses while playing this game. So it can be for grammar as well.
That's awesome. Okay. So I like that idea. And especially, of course it's going to depend on the levels, but now you're not assuming a background knowledge of the correct vocabulary or something like that. They have an option there to work with and to pull from. That's very clever. Okay. Because I'm always like, it's going to be so much work to go and click around to each student and then send them the particular words or whatever it is. Or I know someone's, if I give them the list, then if I give the list to everybody and I just say, you just look on page 1 and you just look on page 2, they're never going to do that, right? They're going to go look at everything. So just giving everything up front, that's really smart. Yeah, I like that a lot. And you're right. That could be adapted to anything if there's a big enough selection of words for them to work with. How do students respond?
And sometimes I'll give them. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was wondering, like, how do the students respond to that? Do they like they seem? Yeah, I'm interested.
Yeah, they really love it. Every time, like someone will be like, "Oh, that was fun." So they have a really reaction. Sometimes I'll give them, I didn't mention this, like 3 pages. So if they get sick of the first page words, they can scroll down to the next page and there are new words they can play with. So just a tip if you have a lot.
Savvy, is this, you were mentioning a list. Is this the list you mentioned where you screenshot it and just put it on a doc? Is that what you do? And then they have access to it. And so they're able to control it once they go into their breakout room, right? Okay.
Exactly.
That's really smart.
Cool. Yeah. All right. Let's get one more activity that you're doing in the breakout rooms, and then we'll I think we're kind of getting close to time, but yeah. But I'm like, okay, I got all these ideas. All right.
Sure. Another one is tic-tac-toe. I don't know if you've played vocabulary tic-tac-toe in your classes before, but almost everyone knows how to play tic-tac-toe. They don't know the name for it, but they know how to play. So I make tic-tac-toe grids, and for vocabulary, you can put like a vocabulary word or idiom in the boxes. For grammar, you might put modals or, irregular verbs, whatever you want them to practice. Then they play tic-tac-toe. You'll have to teach them how to annotate. So again, I show them screenshots to show them how to draw on the screen on Zoom.
Oh, the Zoom annotations. Okay.
Yes. But if my non-credit students can do it, like, and I love my non-credit students, but sometimes it takes us a little time with tech. Sure. But I think if my students can do it, your students can do it too, with the proper, preparation. So basically tic-tac-toe, every square has a word. On your turn, if you want to go in a box, you have to ask your partner a question with that word, and then they can answer. If you want to practice like irregular verbs, you can make a sentence.
Okay.
But I like questions. It's more communicative. And so they're trying to win the game by using the words or verb forms in the boxes.
So the person asking the question gets the X or whatever their indicated key is. There,
exactly.
Right? Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's so. Then that's for. Do you do that with pairs only, or do that with smaller groups to watch, or how do you break that up? Yeah,
so preferably pairs, and I wouldn't do this with non-credit. I wouldn't do this at the beginning of the semester. We did this, I think, maybe 2 weeks ago. So that was week 6, I think, or week 5. So I first, make sure they've been sharing screens for a few weeks, and then I'll teach them how to annotate. And so if you want to do pairs, you have to make sure that, everyone, at least half of your people know how to share screens. You could do groups of 2 and have them like take turns asking and answering. It might get a little more complex. And I would say that I model it a lot the first time. Mm-hmm. Usually if you do it once, the next time you don't have to, do that much preparation. But I would say it takes a few minutes of modeling 1 or 2 games before they can do it by themselves.
So it sounds, Savvy, that what I'm hearing you talk about this is that there's got to be a clear purpose when you're doing all of these activities, right? It's not just what we normally would do and go to that room and read to each other. There's got to be a purpose before, during, and after, right? And then you can do the games, the little activities. But I think that when sometimes, because I've had teachers come and ask me, like, I really want to learn how to use breakout rooms. And what they're saying is, what other purposes can I use it for than just putting them into groups? Mm-hmm. And just thinking about that, I think this will probably help a lot of us out there as we're thinking. As Brent said, not everybody, they know there's a breakout room function. And sometimes I've had teachers tell me, because I'm currently doing a lot of tech training, they come in but I'm afraid that it's going to go wrong, or I'm afraid I don't know where and that's okay. And like you said, have a clear purpose, explain it to the students. We're trying this for the first time. If it fails, we try again tomorrow, or we adjust, right? And so, but I think being purposeful in all of these activities helps them to be beneficial for the students. And I firmly believe that when students know there's a purpose, even if they don't know to verbalize it, they come out of the activity knowing like, hey, that was fun. Let's do it again. Or maybe not even fun, but hey, I got something out of that. Let's do it again.
Definitely. And it makes them feel more comfortable because they know their classmates better. And it's, not so intimidating to show up to class once you have some friends there.
Yeah, I also think Jigsaw maybe not so much in this case. Jigsaw might be longer, but I like that these are kind of quick grab and go activities in a way, right? Because then it's like go in, get the work done, and then come out and we can do the next part and move forward with things, right? Because I think what happens is a lot of times, depending, like I'll have different activities going on, but sometimes they run too long, right? Or sometimes they're, like it's like, okay, well, how much time do they actually need to get through all of this? Mm-hmm. But when you know that it's kind of like I think you had mentioned that there might be like 15 minutes average or something like that, then it's just get it done, come out, and then we're ready to go and move to the next part. Do you always choose like activities that are shorter in general, or what? Do you have a standard for that?
Yeah, I think it's just my style. I'm like a little high strung and I like to, move to the next thing. So generally I would say, I don't have my students spend more than 10 minutes on a single thing. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's, 10 minutes in breakout room, 5 minutes, together, maybe 5 more minutes debrief, presenting, and then, back to the breakout rooms for 5 to 10 minutes and then back out. So I like to always be, jumping between one thing and the next. And then if one thing doesn't work out, then you know what, you'll have another thing that you can do after.
Yeah.
That way it doesn't get boring.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, that's true. I would not want to be in a breakout room for 40 minutes. And I know that I've heard colleagues, and not necessarily that I work with now, but just in general, like, well, what do I do during those 40 minutes? It's like, what do you mean? What do you do during those 40 minutes while they're in a breakout room? You're leaving them in a breakout room for 40 minutes. I know what I would do as a student.
That may be a bit much.
Yeah, that's there's another thing that I always think of as just kind of a hint to teachers, I guess, which is that when you click on that button to return them back from the breakout rooms, if it's like set, I know you can adjust this time, right? So you can say, hey, it's going to be 15 seconds or 30 seconds or 1 minute, but mine's just defaulted at 30 seconds. So when they get the notification, they're going to come. A hint to me that the activity is working well is that they don't come back until the whole room closes down, right? If I click that button and then it's like 3 seconds later, everybody starts coming back, then it means they've been done and they're ready to come back into the main room, right? But if I click it and it's that whole 30 seconds moves through, and then it's like, okay, now at the very end, the whole group comes back together, then I'm like, okay, you guys were clearly talking to each other and working on all of this. And so, so that tends to work out pretty well as an indicator, I think, that your activity is working, and kind of keep notes on that as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I also, I've had to mention to my students, you know what, when you're done, you're not done. You're here to learn English. If you're finished with your activity, you're never done. Make conversation, practice your English. So,
did you know that there's more?
So you're never really done.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Savvy, these are lots of great ideas. I think a lot of places for people to go and get started, and maybe planning adjustments to their lessons, or for people who are going to get started with these things. But there's kind of so much just to run with the idea of recognizing a few of these patterns that you can use. Before we kind of move on and wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like people to know or think about when they're building or planning using breakout rooms more in their classes?
Well, I think if you're hesitating because you don't think it's going to work, don't worry. The beauty of breakout rooms is a lot of it is on the students. So you just have to set it up, and then the students will take it from there. So it's really not as scary as it seems. Otherwise, I think for me, visuals, like I mentioned, visuals and preparation, and I think it'll go well. Yeah. And there are many different things you can do. I think sometimes teachers get intimidated. I know I did when the pandemic first started. There's so many tools out there. I have to learn them all. My students will expect me to use something different every class, but that's really tiring for the students to always be using like a new tech tool and always learning something new. So I think the beauty of Zoom and breakout rooms is there's a million things you can do with only one tool. So it doesn't have to be, about learning so many new things.
Awesome. So with that, I think we're ready to wrap up and move over to our fun finds.
Okay, so for our fun finds, this time I have a food item. It is something I picked up at the Japanese dollar store in California, and I'm sure you can find them online. But this is tao kae noi, which is a Japanese tempura crispy seaweed, and I picked up the spicy kind. They're just like chips. So if you've had, I think Brent, you've mentioned the ones from Trader Joe's.
Yeah, those are good.
They're really good. I'm regretful that I didn't go back for more.
Oh, you did, yeah. I didn't. So, I thought for some reason I had it in my head, Ixchell, that you didn't like that spicy of food. So you chose this.
Oh no, I love spicy food.
Oh, okay. Why did I have that? Okay, never mind. I apologize.
What's the other, Ixchell?
Yeah, my other co-host named Ixchell. Okay, awesome. So mine is we're in the middle of October here, and I think a lot of people know that I like horror movies and Halloween. And so this year I am doing, the 31-day challenge of watching movies. I try to watch a horror movie or a horror, TV show or something every day. And so there's a hashtag 31 days of horror challenge. And a friend showed this to me where they didn't tell you which movies to watch. They just gave you a theme. So it's like, college kids or, bad witch or good witch or something like that, and then you try and think of for yourself something that might fit into that category. And so I'm just having a good time, and this year I'm trying to watch a bunch of movies that I've never seen before, or that I've maybe only seen once or something in the long past. So by the time this episode comes out, we'll already be more than halfway through the month, but you can still participate and you can still go back and watch any of these movies. So hashtag 31 days of horror challenge. It's people are doing it on Instagram and on Twitter and everything else. So I'm having a good time with that one. Savvy, how about you?
Sounds fun. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of pandemic baking and cooking for the last 6 months. All of our waistlines are slowly expanding over here.
Or not so slowly.
But not so slowly. Lately, my students were posting pictures of some of the things they were baking, and I saw they were baking things with matcha. So I bought some matcha, and I made matcha waffles, and I've been drinking matcha lattes, and I'm going to try to make everything matcha. that I can right now. I'm really into it.
You know, the trick with matcha is like by itself, it's quite healthy, but when you put it into waffles, it doesn't really do much for your health. But
Don't tell me that.
Well, we're just glad this is not a health podcast.
Yes, we certainly would not survive that very well. So, all right.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. You could win one-of-a-kind DIESOL pin by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. We haven't seen any recently. So if you're out there listening...
So sad for Halloween. Where are our new reviews? Actually, it's weird because we have quite a few reviews in there. Did we catch everyone in there, Ixchell? We should double check.
We got to double check. But if you're giving us a shout out in any other way, tag us on social media so that we know that you're out there.
That's right. So for show notes, any information on this episode, you can go check out diesel.org/27. And you can also listen to us at VoiceEd Canada, so voiceed.ca, where there's lots of other great education shows. Of course, you can find us on Twitter. You can find the show at DIESOLPod, and you can find me at Brent G. Warner.
You can find me, Ixchell, at IXY_PIXY. That's Ixie_Pixie.
And Savvy, how can people find you?
Yeah, you can send me an email. My email is Savyonne, SAVYONNE @gmail.com. And,
look at you.
Feel free to ask any questions.
Wow, so fancy.
That email.
That's like a first name email. You got the Madonna of emails in there. So.
One of the few benefits of a difficult name.
Yeah, that's true. So it's like you, Madonna, and Beyonce have your own only names at Gmail. Okay, so awesome. So they can find you on Gmail, and of course, we'll have a link to that in the show notes as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In Hebrew, thank you is tada. Tada for tuning in to the DIESOL podcast.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
See you next time.
Bye.